Welcome to Drop the Shades, the space where we dim the noise, quiet the chaos, and reclaim our inner balance.
Well, welcome to another episode of Drop the Shades. And I have the privilege of having Mike Oglesbee on my show. He is a coach, a certified clinical hypnotherapist, as well as a neuralistic programming practitioner. He is also an author, speaker, and he does workshops for all different types of individuals, as well as personal workshops as well. So we're going to learn all about hypnotherapy and NLP programming, and I'm excited to have you on board. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you so much, Joseph. It's good to be here.
Same. Mike, tell me a little bit about why you do what you do before we delve into what you actually do.
You know, if I had to go back and really draw from the source of what inspires me and moves me, it's pain, man. You know, my whole life, suffering and pain and struggle. I was a very troubled kid. And through my journey of healing, I've learned how to change those internal factors that propel us into these states of anxieties and depressions and behaviors and patterns that kind of rule our life and kind of drain us, you know, really, and leave us, you know, dried out and just, you know, surviving through life. And through that journey of healing, I've created a process, a systematic or strategic approach to healing. And I'm really excited to share that with people because, you know, life doesn't have to be full of suffering. You know, pain is inevitable, but we don't have to just move through life in these daunting states and you know, moving with low self-esteem and feeling like failures and getting to the end, which is my greatest fear, I think, is getting to the end of my life and looking back with regret, knowing that I didn't follow my heart and my truth and really step up into the world as the man that I know that I can be.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I've been able to accomplish that for myself, or at least be on that journey of accomplishing that ever unfolding, you know, I found a very powerful and effective way to do that. And so, you know, it's like, you know, it's a gift, and when you get a gift, you want to share it.
Yeah.
And so that's what I do. I share it.
I find that suffering is a very common theme in life in general. And if anyone tells you that they're not suffering, I think they're probably lying. And
yeah, most definitely.
What I want to know is if you can unpack a little bit. You described you had a troubled childhood. Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Oh yeah. The youngest of three boys, and I grew up in this environment. And you know, first and foremost, you know, my oldest brother, he's only 5 years older than me, so you know, children can be really vicious. They can be quite mean, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And so I grew up in this environment that I was picked on and bullied and humiliated, embarrassed a lot, and never old enough, never tall enough, never good enough in some way. So I grew up with a complex right off the bat. I mean, and that, when you grow up with a low self-esteem, and that's going to propel you into a lot of suffering and a lot of pain and trouble.
Sure.
And it did. And so when I hit the age of about 11, that's when the trouble started coming out. Those hormones are flowing and you don't know what to do with them. So, you know, I started getting in trouble. Started having a lot of anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, and I didn't know what to do. And, you know, I grew up, you know, my teenage years, they were in the 90s.
Yep.
And at least where I'm from, you know, therapy and counseling and getting help, there was a stigma.
Sure.
Right? Like, ooh, stay away from those people. There's something wrong with them.
And it still is in some cultures.
It still is. There still is, which is sad. But I think we've evolved, you know, quite far since then. But I always had mental health issues. And I ended up getting kicked out of school 4 different times. Got kicked out of public school. I went to a private Christian school, got kicked out of that twice. Went back to public school, got kicked out of it. So I just got a GED at 16, you know, never made it past the 10th grade. And started getting in trouble, you know, even more. Drugs, addictions, running, just a very troubled life. And and it just unfolded from there, troubled childhood, troubled adulthood, until I just had so much pain and couldn't take it that, life moved me into, a path of healing.
What was your parents' reaction to this? They obviously were witness to what you were going through. How do they react to this?
To the transformation?
Yeah.
Very interestingly, I tell you, when you think about people that love you, I think most people automatically assume they want the best for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that what people think is best for you is what they hold as an idea of what's best for you. But when you don't meet that idea, they don't necessarily accept that. And so this year will be 9 years of estrangement for me from my parents and both of my siblings.
No contact?
But very, very little contact with my parents, an occasional text of happy birthday, that type of thing. And that's a hard journey. I mean, estrangement's a very, very difficult thing.
Yeah.
But with my brothers, there's no contact. Eventually you have to make a choice sometimes. And this isn't for everybody, but at some point you got to make a choice. Do you stay in that room that is toxic and debilitating? Or do you dare to step out and find your journey and your heart and your truth and show up in this world as the person that you can be and have always wanted to, but we're always too afraid to. And someday, we all got to face that fear on some level. My mind happened to be with my family.
Sure.
So
would you say that you love them? Your siblings?
I would say I love them. And in fact, I would say that I love them so much that I'm unwilling to have anything but a healthy relationship, even if that means no relationship with them.
Okay. Okay. So you're in the business of helping other people, and I love your stuff. I've listened to podcasts that you've been a guest on, and you really have a powerful message that is empowering, enlightening, and very insightful. Here's a tough question for you. How do you reconcile an estrangement, your own estrangement with your family, with your chosen career of helping other people relate better to themselves and to their world and environment, which includes relationships?
So love, when you hear the word estrangement, and I think it's becoming a lot more common these days, but when you hear the word estrangement, there's an automatic, for a lot of people, idea of a disconnect from love. But my estrangement is a product of love.
Mm-hmm.
Not a product of my love for them, but my product of love for myself. And one of the things growing up with a low self-esteem is, that's a disconnect of love for yourself.
Sure.
And as I've grown in my journey and become more empowered, I've learned how to love myself. And part of loving yourself is setting boundaries. And so when I set my boundaries for myself, that's when I was kicked out of my family. And that's what created the estrangement. And it has been love for myself that has kept the estrangement going, because I refuse to accept mistreatment of me.
Yeah.
And so it's a hard road, but when you can show up in this world as the greatest version of yourself, which you cannot do without love, you cannot do that without self-love, because that is an expression of love. And, if you want to show up in this world as the person that you're meant to be, you have to love yourself. And sometimes that means letting go of those things that prevent it. And for some people, it happens to be where they came from.
Sure.
And so that is an act of empowerment, a very hard one, but it is an act of empowerment. And so I always encourage people to start with themselves, because the greatest gift that you can bring to the world is the best version of
Of
yourself.
course.
And anything that stands in that way, if you compromise to that and you sacrifice love for yourself, well, you're not going to live the life that you could live.
True.
It's not going to be as fulfilling and happy. And so I always encourage a person to set those boundaries for themselves. And I always say, when you set a boundary, you never set it on someone else. You set it for yourself and you express it on someone else. And you don't expect other people to respect your boundaries. You ensure they do. So you take all the responsibility and you put it on yourself.
Got it. Guardrail, if
Right.
you will, for yourself.
Guardrails, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that is love. And can you imagine a world where we all did that? What a wonderful place it would be.
It would.
And so sometimes that just means you got to cut some things out. And sometimes it's really difficult to do that. But man, the life that you get in return for that, it's a worthy one.
Well, it's a very interesting point, and I had never heard, the idea of estrangement and boundaries described in that way, where it comes, it's so rooted in self-love. And the way that I approach life is that I can enter a room as a candle that lights all the other candles in the room, or I can enter the room and snuff out every candle in the room.
Yeah.
And so you can either be the light or bring darkness to a room. And that all starts from within, right? So that brings me to your chosen career, obviously a career that's rooted in a lot of what I hear: stress, anxiety, and the suicidal ideation. By the way, that's a very dark space to be in. How did you find your way out of that?
I remember writing my first suicide note out at, I think I was 12 or 13. And I just thought that was the way life was, because that's the way life was for me. And as a kid, you don't understand, you just experience.
Mm-hmm.
And as an adult, when something, I'll say bad, but I don't believe necessarily in bad. I just think that things are misunderstood and we call them bad because of how they feel. But when something bad would happen, my mind would automatically go into that thought pattern of, oh, you know what, it'd be better off if I wasn't here, and nobody would really miss me. And, almost this automatic pattern would show up. And I remember walking around my office one day and something had happened, and this pattern showed up. And I'm in my mid-30s at this time. And I remember thinking, I always say I want to live till I'm in my triple digits if I'm healthy. Right? I want a long, healthy life. I want to hit 100, maybe 110. Shoot, I'll go to 150 if I'm healthy. And I thought, this is just the way my brain thinks. Now, I know I don't want to do this. I know I don't want to take myself out. I don't want to experience this pain, but I don't want to stop experiencing all the good too, because there's a lot of good in my life. And I thought, well, if this is just the way my brain thinks, I might as well just accept that. And when that pops up, because I don't want to fight this for 60, 70 more years, so when it pops up, I'm just going to say, okay, that's what it is. This is the way my brain thinks. I know I don't want to do it, and just center my focus on whatever it is I'm doing. Little did I know the power in what I had just realized. Because when that popped up, because it did, when it would pop up, I'd be like, oh, hey, it's just a voice in the background. Hey, yeah, I know. I figured you'd show up right about now. Yeah, you go and hang out as long as you want. I'm busy doing this. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I know. Yeah, okay. Anyway, and I just stopped fighting it. I just let go. I just let it happen. Because fighting it never worked.
Sure.
I don't have suicidal ideation anymore. And that's when I learned the power of acceptance.
Question: what'd you do with the notes, or the note that you wrote?
I don't know. I think I just remember maybe throwing it away or something, so I didn't get caught.
Yeah.
So nobody would find it.
Yeah. I can't imagine getting to a mindset of writing a note like that, but it's always remarkable to me, you know, the fact that our brain is our greatest asset, but also probably our greatest enemy. And so
Yeah.
one of my mantras is, viewing my thoughts as kind of like clouds in the sky. Just observe them
Yeah.
passing for the most part, and don't listen to your thoughts because most of them are lies. And
Most of them are
that
lies.
kind of
You're right.
keeps me going because
Mhm.
that the ability to be the observer of your thoughts rather than a participant is such a leap that unfortunately most people can't make. And that's why we deal with so much reactivity in our world and in our culture. People whose um the seat of their emotion, their amygdala, is on fire, and it's just purely emotion driven, fight or flight, if you will. And so let's dive into what you do. I find it fascinating. You are a certified clinical hypnotherapist. Tell me all about it. I know nothing about that kind of stuff.
You know, I think one of the primary things I've had to do, because I've been doing this for 15 years now, and one of the primary things I've had to do, especially when it comes to hypnosis, is teach people what it's not. Because people have an idea of what it is. You see TV, you think of the stage shows, and the stage shows are real. Most of the people on the stage, they're in, this somnambulistic stage of
Yeah.
hypnosis. They're very highly suggestible. And there's about 10% of the population on average that would fit that mold. That's a very temporary thing. That's not a lasting thing. It's
Mhm.
for entertainment. I move more on the clinical side. So, you think of hypnotherapy. So you have hypnosis mixed with a therapeutic modality.
Yeah.
So that's why it's hypnotherapy. So, when we talk about change, change isn't a conscious thing. There's a conscious part of the process of change, but we have belief systems that form our identity. And that's what drives us in life. Who you think you are, who you believe you are, determines how you show up in the
Our
world.
paradigm.
And how you show up in the world. Right. And that determines your life. If you look at anyone in the world, you'll find that their life fits them because it is them.
Mhm.
I always say life is reflective. It's like a mirror,
True.
and it's individual for all of us. We all exist on the same plane, billions of people, but every single person lives in their own reality
Mhm.
because reality isn't physical, it's mental. And that mentality is expressed into the physicality. We project our mentality onto things. And that's why I always say everything rises and falls on the mindset. How you think of something determines how you experience it.
Sure.
And so all of that stems, or the force of it radiates from the subconscious. And so change is really about, changing those fundamentals, those belief systems, those pieces of the identity that view that then propel those expressions in life. So real change has to take place on a subconscious level. So hypnotherapy works directly with the subconscious. It's a process of bypassing the conscious mind, right? So we could either put a person to sleep or get them in a trance state. Kind of like, when you take a long distance drive and you forgot the road you just drove on.
Yeah.
Well, what happens as you focus like that, your brain waves start to lower. And you got four primary brain waves. You got beta, which is your normal interactive state. But when you start concentrating, you go into the alpha brainwave state. And then if you go even deeper than that, you go into the theta. And then the deepest is the
Right.
delta. Okay. So we go into this while we sleep at night. We're in and out of these stages.
Or
But if we can get into that alpha,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
When we get into that alpha, the brain, or the mind rather, becomes up to 200 times more suggestible. It's like it just opens up to receive information. Right. That's why like school classes are typically boring, so they can absorb more information. So we open that up to a higher state of suggestibility, and then we push new narratives. And what I mean by narratives is new stories. And if you think about anything you think about in life, there's a story attached to it.
Yeah.
Life is nothing more than a compilation of a bunch of
True.
stories. An idea in your mind is a story.
Mhm.
Everything's story. So with hypnotherapy, we get into that lower brainwave state to open the brain up to absorb more information. And then we push in new stories. And these are stories for me, it's stories of empowerment. Now, a lot of people, when they think of hypnosis, like, okay, I'm going to go see someone for a fear. And a lot of times you'll see hypnotherapy written for that fear. Like, okay, it's a fear of bridges. We're going to try to change the idea of what a bridge is so that we no longer experience that response of fear, right? So it's a story. What I do, I'll touch on the actual fear or the thing, the anxiety, whatever that is. But what I focus more on is the core factors, right? Like confidence, believing in yourself, self-trust, resiliency, because these are the things that hold the stories in place to begin with. So I do primarily core work.
Okay.
Because even if you face a fear, because you're going to face fear in life, I mean, it's just a part of life, right? But it doesn't matter if you face a fear if you're willing to be courageous in the face of it. So if we push the courage, well, then it doesn't matter if the fear is there. Instead of just facing that one fear, we can face all of our fears. So I focus on the core factors. That's how I use the hypnotherapy. So I push those narratives of empowerment for people.
Okay.
And a lot of times we don't even have to touch the symptom itself.
Are there any pitfalls to accessing someone's brain at the subcortical level? Like, I kind of think of our subconscious as this place that holds a lot of different thoughts, memories, narratives that don't really come up to the surface, and some of them shouldn't come up to the surface, maybe as a kind of a protective mechanism. Do you see any dangers or pitfalls in that? Do you ever walk into a space where the hypnotherapy was not necessarily the best idea for that one particular client?
So there are occasions that can happen. With the way that I practice, I never enter those spaces. But if you, like, when you learn the history of hypnosis, hypnosis was actually introduced into the medical community before anesthesia came in,
Right.
and it was used on a person having brain surgery.
Right.
And they didn't feel it, and they healed like 7 times faster than the average person. But then you have Sigmund Freud. And Sigmund Freud messed it up for the whole industry.
Yeah.
So he had these, and I'm going to paraphrase this. So he had these like 30-some women who were neurotic. And so he put them into hypnosis, and he did regression, which is something I never do, which means he went back. And he says, okay, you're 4 years old. You're laying in bed. Somebody comes into your room. Who is it? Is it your dad? Did your dad come into your room? And he walks over to your bed. What did he do? Did he touch you? And so he did this like leading type of a thing, and he installed false memories. So next thing you know, you got 30-some women who were molested by their fathers, which was later found out that it wasn't true. So the medical community completely distanced themselves from hypnosis. That's how it got kicked out, right?
Right.
You can go in and create false memories. And that's the reason I don't do regression hypnosis.
Okay.
Right? It's because I don't want to mess with the memories that are in place. Because let's say something tragic did happen, and we can go in and we can reassociate that and change the response to it, right? Because it's not about what happened, it's about what you perceive happens. Like 20 people, they watch the same event. You have 20 different perceptions, 20 different experiences, and you can change that experience.
Right.
But you can do that with the conscious mind as well. We don't have to go in the subconscious and implant some, narrative. I don't ever do that. So I safeguard myself from something like that ever happening. But it is a possibility, and it does happen.
Interesting. In my research and in my practice in anesthesia, I deal with people on one of the most vulnerable moments in their life, just before they're about to go to sleep. Surgery. And in just a very few minutes, I'm supposed to establish trust for that person to give me complete agency over what happens to them. So I'm blessed to be in that profession. I'm grateful to have been at it for about 30 years, but I've come across this idea and this fact that every one of us is a culmination of every single thing that has happened in our lives and every person that we have come into contact with. And so all of that cumulatively shows up in the pre-op area talking to me. So I can tell a lot by the energy level of the person whom I just met. I don't know them from before. I can tell a lot about, where they're at. And in my research, I've come to discover that people who've experienced trauma, particularly in the formative years, in childhood years, they kind of get stunted. Their emotional growth stops. So, I think I'm dealing with, someone who is a 6-year-old who was severely traumatized by a particularly bad experience and who is stuck there. And I find that I'm dealing with a highly reactive individual who is panic stricken, not trusting of anyone. And so I wonder if you come across that in your field, where you come across obstacles and barriers with your client, who may be a very high functioning individual running a big business or company and on the surface of it, very successful, but underneath they are a terrified child.
Oh, all the time. And the insight that you're talking about is incredible that you have that, because not a lot of people can see that, beneath the surface, behaviors that are going to come out. And I always say, like, because I do a lot of work with couples as well, a lot of relationship coaching. And so when someone pitches a fit, I tell the other person, I said, just let me know, like, if you had to put an age to what just happened, to that collapse, to that, breakdown, what age would you say that they just acted like? Oh, they're like a 13-year-old. That's probably because they have trauma and they got stuck. There's a part of that emotional development because of that trauma that got stunted there. And so in traditional therapy, which I don't do traditional therapy, they'll go back and they'll try to work with that. What I do is I say, okay, well, this is where we're stuck at, but this is where we are. How can we develop that and mature that part of yourself right now, moving forward, and bring it up to speed?
Bridge the gap.
And bridge that gap, and but yeah, I see that all the time. I mean, we all have it, because life itself is traumatic. I mean, you don't have to live a terrible life to get stuck in places. You know what I mean? Right. Like, we all have it.
Yeah. And
yeah, all the time.
Yeah. Interesting. I'm a huge fan of Thich Nhat Hanh, and I don't know if you're familiar with him, but the whole idea that life's about suffering and how you navigate through it, right? It's finding meaning within the suffering. And of course, in the Buddhist philosophy, you're supposed to embrace that inner child. You're supposed to talk to them and nurture them and help them feel safe so that they can catch up to your biological age.
Yeah. I have this process I go through with people is when they're struggling with something, like, for example, I had this guy as a professional golfer, and he would get out on the field and, he would start having this anxiety and start having these things come up. And I said, well, when did this start for you? He's like, maybe around 20 when I was in college. I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to close your eyes. I want you to put your hands over your heart like this. And I want you to give that part of you that's trying to tell you something, because these are messages. Anxieties and struggles, they are messages.
Yeah.
And they're trying to tell us something. And so I want you to just sit there, and I want you to give that part of you permission to come up and tell you whatever it wants to tell you. And I don't want you to try to interrupt it. I don't want you to try to heal it. I don't want you to try to tell it, oh, it's okay, it's going to be, none of that. I want you to just give it space and let it tell you what it wants to tell you. Let it be heard. Because see, one of the things we do most of the time when we struggle is we stuff it down. We suppress that. Yep. And then that accumulates over time. And then we have blow-ups, and we have crash outs in our life. Give it space. And then once it gets all of that out and it's emptied itself out to you, that's when you got to step in and you got to reparent yourself. You know, maybe your parent didn't do what they needed to do and your emotional needs weren't met. Mine weren't. They didn't know how to meet my emotional needs. I'm a grown man now. Now it's my job, it's my responsibility to go back and reparent that part of myself that got stuck at 6 or 7, or that little boy that got picked on by his brothers. That's my job, my responsibility now. So when something comes up, a struggle, it's trying to tell me something. And I have a philosophy. I call it, what is the gift? And I look at every single struggle, every challenge, every difficulty in life as a gift. And the gift is that there's an opportunity in that to become better, whether it's learning or growing. But it's our job to find that opportunity and to use that opportunity.
Mm.
And so when we do that, like he was talking about with the suffering, about navigating through it and finding meaning and purpose, everything does. We're just not taught how to find that meaning. And so a lot of what I do is teach people how to find that meaning.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to go back and change what happened to you. Yeah, that was terrible. And you should have never been treated this way, or that should have never happened. And you were victimized. But you don't have to carry the victim mentality. You can actually take this and use this to better yourself, to better your life, and to bring something new to other people who are going through the same thing.
Yeah.
So you can take that burden and make it your blessing. It can become a gift. And by living what is the gift, you can then become the gift for others.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And that kind of reminds me of what Oprah did with her childhood experience. And it's horrifying to read what she went through and what she has become. And to me, I think it doesn't mean that the scars are gone. It just means that she came to peace and acceptance with it and found meaning within the suffering, and which is a very common theme that I find in, people that I talk to, books that I read. So let's move on to another facet of your career, NLP training, neuro-linguistic programming. Another topic that I know very little about. Teach me all you know.
So, I mean, as the name implies, it's the internal language, the internal map. It's about associations, right? Because how you associate something, the meaning that you give something, determines the experience you have with it. And one of the cool things I always think about is one of the greatest gifts we have in life is that nothing in life has a meaning on its own. You can, again, you take 20 people looking at the same thing and it has a different meaning.
It needs context.
And that meaning can be changed.
Yep.
Right? So when you look at something, it's like, oh, that's terrible. Well, it's not terrible. You're just calling it terrible because you define it as terrible. And if you go in there and you re-identify that within yourself, and you could do that, and that's a great thing NLP is for, then you can have a completely different experience with it. You don't have to change it like a memory, something bad happened to you. You change what that means to you, your brain and body produce a whole different response. Sure. It's a wonderful thing. And that's really where the NLP comes in, just reassociating and changing that internal language.
I think I kind of did that naturally in my own life. My family fled Iran in 1979, right after the revolution took place. And terrible experience. I was 12 and a half. And, my dad came home and said, we have to leave. And so, as you can imagine, a highly disruptive event in my life and my family's life threw my dad into a major bout of depression because he left a thriving career and his dream house that he had just bought. And so that negative experience is specifically the reason why I am where I am, why I have been married to my wife for almost 32 years, why I know all 5 of my kids. If it weren't for that negative experience, I wouldn't know all these wonderful and beautiful human beings in my life. And I was just talking about it to my wife, and I said, independent events in and of themselves don't have meaning. You have to put it in context.
Yeah.
And sometimes that the reason why things happen don't reveal themselves. They don't manifest for years or even decades. And
Yeah.
and I love that. And so give me an example of how, if a client shows up to you, how you deal with that. How do you teach?
So first, I do a lot of teaching, which is unusual in the coaching world, because in traditional training, coaches are taught like everybody has the answers within them, and our job is to point them to those answers.
Yeah.
But I don't believe that, because it's kind of like if you never learn the ABCs, right? It doesn't matter how much meditation you do or how deep you search, you're never going to find it because your brain hasn't captured that. So I do a lot of teaching. I teach people how to use their minds, how to change their minds, how to discipline their minds, how to think through filters and understand life and themselves in a very different way. And so, for example, I had this guy. I think he was like 70, 72, something like that. And him and his wife had been married for like 10 years. And they had this beautiful home on the lake and a beautiful lawn that he loved taking care of. And he would go out there and he'd mow it and keep it trimmed. That was kind of his thing because he was retired and he needed something, and that was his something. And he came and he said, Mike, I am flustered and I need some help with this. I said, okay, what you got? He said, man, I got this beautiful backyard. Me and my wife, we love to sit on the back porch and look at it. He said, but my wife wants to put a bird feeder right in the middle. Like it's going to disrupt everything. I said, okay, all right. I said, okay, so you and your wife, you sit on the back porch together and you look out at the lawn. He said, yeah. I said, do you love your wife? He's like, yeah, I love her. I said, do you enjoy spending your time with her? Yeah. Do you want her to enjoy the time she spends with you? Yeah. Well, do you want to be a co-creator with your wife? Do you want to be someone that embraces her vision and her embrace your vision and you guys do this together? Isn't that why you got married? Yeah. I said, well, you want that bird feeder in the middle of your backyard because you want to be part of that experience that she gets to have when she's sitting there beside you, enjoying that vision that you guys, both you and her, have put together as a masterpiece. And you want to be involved in that, and you want to be someone who can give her that. Problem is, you're just thinking about the disruption of how you typically do your lawn. And you're thinking about, oh, I've got to change this and change that. You're not thinking about the beauty and the co-creation of you and her doing this together. He's like, man, I want that bird feeder in the middle of my backyard. So you do. So he just changing that meaning.
I like that. I like that. Mike, in reading or actually listening to some of the podcasts you've done, you actually discuss something really interesting. You describe the fact that you are refined by your experiences rather than defined. Delve into that a little bit.
So I've been through a lot of tough experiences, and as many people have, and I often say I've lived like 20 lives in this one lifetime, man. And I used to be a product, just reactive. We were talking earlier about how people just react, and that's the way I was. I was very destructive and rebellious and lashed out at the world, and so I was just a product of my environment. But when I was able to go within myself and change the meaning of things and see that these are opportunities for me, the anxiety, the debilitating anxiety and depression that I've had, throughout my life, and that suicidal ideation, getting rid of that has allowed me to be of service in a greater way in this world. And by doing that work on myself and sitting with myself and introspecting and changing the meaning of those and stepping into that, I've allowed myself to become refined. And my story that I once was so embarrassed about is now my strength. It's my source of being able to show up for people and be relatable, because that's the way that I, find my clients is they call me and they're going through something I've already been through and I've healed from. And so I stand as a source of inspiration. I stand as someone who's been refined because I've allowed myself to use it to better me. And so I've refined myself with my struggles rather than just becoming a definition of them, which is what I think most people are.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I like that definition. I have a tough time relating to thought leaders who are unable to share anything personal about their lives as part of their origin story. And they kind of come across as this guy who's been successful since they came out of the womb and rich, and
Nobody wants to hear
nobody
that.
wants to hear that. And so,
Nobody wants to hear that.
and it's
unrelatable.
It's 100% unrelatable. So I like that level of vulnerability that makes you real. And you talk about experiences that a lot of people go through, and as I have, and in my stories on my podcast, I kind of give my audience kind of a window into my history and my past. And as you know, in the medical profession, it's physicians typically don't talk about mental health unless obviously you're a psychotherapist and or a psychiatrist, but we don't typically talk about that. There's this stigma associated with it, and physicians are afraid of talking about feeling sad or depressed out of fear that they're going to get reported and they're going to have their license removed, or it's a tough field in some ways, and I do think that's changing, by the way, but we don't see that a lot, and that's part of the reason why the medical professionals have a rate of suicide that's almost double the general population. And so
It's sad, they have to perform.
we have to perform. And for someone like myself, and I don't suffer from depression, but I'm an introvert. And so, but when I go to work,
Me too.
which I love, and I love Susan Cain's book called Quiet. I don't know if you've ever read that. If you haven't, amazing book, kind of describe me to a T. But when we go to work and we interact with other people, we have to be performers, where we become extroverts. But I live in that space a lot of the time. And so it's taken me some time to be able to talk about that to people and be candid about it, that it is okay to talk about mental health. Which brings me to the topic of anxiety. How do you define anxiety?
Anxiety comes from negative future-based thinking. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if they do this? What if they don't do that? The anxiety and depression. So anxiety and depression are the same thing. Kind of like hot and cold. They're just different ends of the spectrum. They're both products of our thinking. Now, there's an anxiousness that your body can get. Let's say you ate a certain food and your body, it disrupts that nervous system. Now, that's different. You can be induced in that, but typically the body will manifest, the feelings, which are what emotions are, energy and motion. It's when you think of a happy thought, you feel happy. You think of a sad thought, you feel sad. You think of a worrisome thought, you start to feel anxious, which is why I teach people how to control their mind, how to discipline their mind, because when you can get a hold of your thinking, then you can start addressing what's causing the anxiety. Anxiety itself is a symptom. It's a messenger letting you know, hey, I'm out of alignment, right? I'm mentally out of alignment. And so when those emotions arise, so you got the thoughts, right, which we're typically unaware of our thoughts. And so if we're going to use our conscious free will to align with the life that we want to have, we need to become aware of our thinking. And that's the job of the emotions, to bring an awareness of the thinking. Now, between the emotions and the action lies our power, choice. So what most people do is they go out and they try to change this because they think that this is causing them anxiety. So if I can just control this, well, then I can feel better in here. And it's an outside-in model, which is why people are stuck in these cycles of anxiety. Instead, what we want to do is we want to take our choice and we want to go back and first mentally align, right? And we want to move ourselves back into the present. Well, what if that does happen? Well, you know what? I'll figure it out. How? terrible question to ask. You don't know how anything. You don't know how you're going to think in the next 5 seconds, or what's going to happen in an hour or the rest of the day. How is the killer of dreams and hopes, right? And it's the creator of doubt. You don't know how anything, right? But when you can start developing your own resilience and start having a present focused mind, then you can have, you can put things in place in case those situations happen in the future. But anxiety comes from negative future-based thinking primarily. And so it's really a matter of disciplining the mind to address the anxiety, because that's just a symptom.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a beautiful definition. In my mind, I've always equated anxiety to our brain's nonstop desire to control and to want predictability in every single scenario. It needs,
which is safety,
right? That's all it's there.
It's safety.
I mean, in some ways, our brain hasn't really evolved much, because it thinks that it's primarily there to protect us from the saber-toothed tiger that's lurking around the corner. And
but we can train that, though, and that's the whole idea.
Yeah.
Train the brain. When you can create, and that psychological security is typically laid between the ages of 9 and 12, and almost primarily from the father figure. Not always, there's different dynamics, but so we learn that we're in a dangerous world. We're not in a dangerous world. We're in a world. Sometimes there's danger, but there's a lot of safety in the world as well. Equally, probably a lot more safety than there is danger, but we attach higher emotions to the things that we don't want than we do the things that are okay. But if we can go in and we can develop psychological security, and that's where I start, right? And I always start with the truth, right? A universal truth. I am resilient and can get through anything that comes my way in life. I always have. And we have proof of that. There's not a single thing for any living creature at this moment. There's not a single thing that it hasn't gotten through up to this point. Because if there was, it wouldn't be here. Right? How do we get through it? We don't know how we got through it. We don't know how we're going to get through it. But we do know we're going to get through it. And so when you start training the brain based on that psychological security, well, you don't need to control. And this is where faith comes in, and not a religious type of a faith, but a practical type of faith, starting to trust life. Life is here to help us, but we've learned that it's not. We've learned that it's here to punish us, because if something bad happens, we call it punishment. But it's not. It's a lesson. It's an opportunity. So when we start shifting those meanings around, we can start gaining that psychological security, which really combats that anxiety. And we can live from the present moment, because the future doesn't exist. It's unfolding presently. Right. And if you're really effective in the present, well, then that's going to make your future what you want it to be. Present alignment creates future alignment. But here we are, we perceive a threat, so the defenses kick in. Oh, I got to do this, I got to control, I got to da. But none of it's necessary. It's just the way we've been conditioned to think and passed down, right, through that genetics. But as we change, and maybe you're familiar with this in quantum physics, we've learned that as we change fundamentally, it changes the DNA sequence, it changes the code. So we're breaking those things out of the DNA. So we're breaking those, what we call generational curses that we're passing down. So now we're not passing those necessarily, those needs that we had before down.
And
but we can break those things.
And that's a well-known, a pretty well-studied subject, for example, with descendants of Holocaust survivors who suffer from depression, anxiety, and fear, unfounded fear, and it's that fear that was instilled in them of being killed. And so and I read up on kind of the techniques that people have to, because you can obviously get through that as well. You can break that generational curse, and
because it's learned.
It is learned, and it is a learned.
So we can learn.
Exactly. Now, Mike, you've kind of talked about a lot of your teachings in your books. Tell me about the books you've written.
So I started writing books in 2012, and I started out with books like activity books and things like that to kind of help my clients. But then I published one in 2020
Mhm.
called Fight Back, End the Cycles of Anxiety and Depression, because I focused on anxiety and depression for many years in my
Yeah.
practice, because those were the biggest struggles that I faced. And as I overcame those, then I wrote that book primarily for my clients to help them as we move along in a program. Um, Back in 2024, I was part of a compilation called Cracking the Rich Code. And I was in volume 14, where I share my story of surrender, which was when things really turned around and all that happened during that estrangement and the letting go and practicing surrender and building faith and that sort of thing. And coming to really understand that life is really here to help me, and really understanding that pain isn't here to harm us. It's here to move us, and it works very well. Um, and so that really set me into a very, very different kind of life, one that brought me success and happiness and joy and just fantastic relationships and just fulfillment, a fulfilling life. So I share, that particular story in that. And I'm currently working on my next book, which is What is the Gift, which shares my philosophy about, how life is here to help us, how to understand the language of life, how to understand our struggles in a way that actually turns them into our strengths, and how to find the gift and the opportunities and things like that. So that's coming up. Hopefully that'll be out this coming up year. So that's what I'm working on now.
Looking forward to that. It's interesting. My whole career is based on surrender. I ask people to surrender to to anesthesia.
Yes.
And it was funny when I came to realize that is every single person who comes to me, they have to surrender their agency to me, and
Yeah.
that's such a high level of trust. I every single time that I anesthetize someone, I feel like it's such a privilege to be.
What an honor.
It really is, and I still talk about it to this day. And I've been doing this for 3 decades. Where I said, "Isn't it amazing? I just met this person 5 minutes ago, and now they are completely surrendering their body to me to take care of them."
Yeah.
And so it is an active effort on my part to never ever take that privilege for granted. Now, as our conversation draws to a close, and of course, there's so many different topics that we could still talk about. Would love to have you back. Where can my audience find you, Mike? We already talked about.
You can go on the web, www.mikeoglesbee.com. It's the easiest place. I'm also on the social media channels. I'm always trying to share wisdom and advice and my stories and inspiration to help other people through their journeys, and so that they can have that fulfillment that I've been able to reach and live that life that I've been able to attain and still continue to evolve into. And I'm very vulnerable with my stories. I share the truth and the reality. There's no, oh, I'm the success. No, there's, hey, we're in this together. We're the same. We're just in different
Yeah.
places. That's all. Let me show you how I did it if you aspire to be that way.
Yeah.
Right. And so social media, pretty much all the social media channels as well.
Got it. Got it. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you on my show. Very
Likewise. Thank
enlightening,
you.
insightful conversation. Learned a lot personally from you, and I'm sure my audience will as well. And I appreciate you joining me on this conversation.
I appreciate it as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.